All right, so picture this. Have you ever walked into a library and it's just books everywhere? Like seriously, stacks on the floor, piles on tables, maybe even a few wedged in the ceiling. Okay, maybe not the ceiling.
But you get the idea, right?
Yeah.
Total chaos.
Right.
Well, that's kind of what tracking insolvencies in India used to feel like this crazy labyrinth of paperwork and no clear system.
Yeah.
But don't worry, listeners. India is bringing some order to this chaos. We're diving deep into two brand new circulars
Oh,
from the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India,
the IBBI.
IBBI exactly,
Yeah.
to figure out how they're using technology to make this whole corporate liquidation process way more transparent.
Yeah, you're probably pretty familiar with the IBBI from like all these high-profile insolvency cases recently. They're like, think of them like the umpire in a cricket match, right?
Okay.
Making sure everyone's playing by the rules.
Right.
And that the game runs smoothly.
Yeah.
Whether it's restructuring a struggling company or making sure the liquidation is handled fairly. Okay, so let's unpack what's in these circulars.
Yeah.
They introduced two sets of electronic forms, right?
Right,
LIQ for standard liquidations
right,
and VL for voluntary liquidations.
exactly.
And get this, these come into effect June 28th, 2024. We are talking hot off the presses information.
Yeah, this is brand new. And what I find really fascinating here is the why behind all of this. So the IBBI, they're really trying to make the whole insolvency process more transparent,
Okay.
which has massive, massive benefit, like for investors, for example, right?
It gives them more confidence in the Indian market, knowing that these companies, if they go through these processes, it's all above board.
That's a really good point, because if I'm thinking about investing in, company XYZ in India,
Right.
I want to know that, okay, if things go south, there's like a system in place that's clear, it's efficient, it's going to handle it.
Exactly. And these forms, they're designed to do exactly that. They basically act as this like digital paper trail,
Right.
capturing each step of that liquidation process, but in a standardized way.
So it's not like digging through like mountains of files, right?
Mhm.
Stakeholders can actually get the information.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's start with the LIQ forms first. So these are for companies that are being forced to liquidate.
Right. So think of it this way. Each LIQ form, it lines up with a specific stage in that company's journey towards being dissolved.
Okay.
It's like chapters in a book, right?
Okay.
So you start with LIQ1, which is kind of like setting the stage, It's got all the basic info, the liquidator's information,
Mhm.
company details, even how much the liquidator's going to get paid. This way, everyone's on the same page from the get-go.
It's like introducing the key players in this whole drama.
Right.
But it's more than just names and contact info, right?
Oh, absolutely. LIQ2 is where things get really interesting. This form covers that critical period, from when the liquidation's announced publicly all the way to when they file that progress report. And this is where you get into the nitty-gritty. Asset valuations, details about sales, if there's any litigation going on, any meetings with stakeholders. And this is important because this is how they figure out how much creditors are going to get.
Right. And that's a key concern, obviously, for anyone who's owed money. So this is where it gets really interesting, right? Like, say I'm a creditor
Right.
and I'm owed a significant chunk of change.
Right.
I'm going to want to know what's happening with the company's assets. How much are they selling for? Am I actually going to see any of my money back?
Exactly.
Transparency is key here.
100%. That's exactly what these forms are trying to do.
So we've got the initial setup, we've got the active liquidation phase.
Mm-hmm.
What about the final stage? What do the LIQ forms tell us about that?
So think of LIQ3 as like the wrap-up, right? It covers everything from that last progress report to when they finally apply to dissolve the company. We're talking like the really fine details, like what happens to any unclaimed proceeds, final asset sales, and, this is crucial, how they're actually going to distribute whatever's left to those creditors.
That sounds like a ton of information to keep track of.
And that's the beauty of these forms, right? They're designed to carry all that information forward, so you're not like starting from scratch with every form.
Oh, okay.
You don't have to keep inputting the same company details or liquidation details. It just flows.
So it streamlines the whole reporting process.
Exactly.
Which I'm sure is music to the ears of insolvency professionals.
Less paperwork for everyone.
Right. Okay, so before we jump into the VL forms, can you give us a real-world example of like how these LIQ forms would actually play out, just so our listeners can like really connect with it?
Absolutely. Okay, so imagine a company that makes those little clay teacups.
Okay.
You get at the chai stalls,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Let's say they've hit a rough patch.
Okay.
They need to liquidate.
Okay, I can picture it now. the clay ovens, stacks of those little teacups.
Exactly. So LIQ1, that's where we establish who's who, the liquidator, the company directors. Then with LIQ2, we get into the action.
Okay.
How much is all that equipment worth?
Right.
Do they have outstanding orders for teacups they have to deal with?
Right.
Maybe there are legal disputes about unpaid bills for the clay. It's like taking inventory of everything they own, everything they owe.
And by putting it all down in these LIQ forms, the IBBI is making sure everything is transparent and above board.
Exactly.
Okay, so I'm really starting to see how these LIQ forms bring like much needed order to what sounds like it was probably a very messy process.
Yeah, totally.
Like almost like taking a really chaotic bazaar and like organizing it into these neat little stalls.
Yeah. That's a great way to put it, yeah. It's all about structure and transparency.
Okay, so we talked about when a company is like, I don't know, for lack of a better term, forced to liquidate.
Yeah.
But what about when a company decides to call it quits on their own terms?
Right.
That's where these VL forms come in.
Right, exactly, yeah. Voluntary liquidation is more like they've decided, okay, we're closing this chapter of our business.
Yeah.
But it's strategic. Right. Maybe the owners are ready to retire or they want to consolidate their operations.
Right.
It's not like the company's crashing and burning, you know?
Yeah.
It's more like a planned exit.
Strategic.
Exactly. And so the VL forms, they're pretty similar to the LIQ ones.
Okay.
Like the process is mirrored to a large extent, but there's way more emphasis on getting the shareholders involved
Okay.
because it's a voluntary closure.
That makes sense because, yeah, if I'm a shareholder in this company and they're like, all right, everybody, we're wrapping it up.
Right.
I want to know what's going on every step of the way.
Exactly. And that's where those VL forms come in. They make sure that every shareholder is up to speed on like, why are we doing this? What's the timeline? And how are we divvying up whatever assets are left?
So it's like VL forms equal transparency and fairness for the shareholders.
You got it.
Okay, so for our listeners out there who might be dealing with cases already in progress, whether it's the standard liquidation or a voluntary one, what's the deadline they need to know about? When do these forms come into play?
Yeah, this is huge. The circulars set a hard deadline of September 30th, 2024
Okay.
for all ongoing cases to be in compliance with these new forms.
So if you're like just starting to think about liquidation or you're like knee-deep in paperwork right now,
Right.
September 30th, mark it down.
It's coming up quick.
Yeah.
And it's both the LIQ and the VL forms. This applies to everybody.
So it seems like the IBBI wants everyone on the same page, like as soon as possible.
Absolutely. It's all part of this big goal of making the insolvency process in India way more transparent and way more efficient.
Which, as we've been saying, is good for everybody involved.
Right.
But like, okay, beyond just these forms, what's the big picture here? Like,
Yeah.
what's the IBBI hoping to achieve? Why should our listeners care about this?
I think at the end of the day, it's about making India a way more attractive, a way safer place to do business.
Okay.
Right? Because when companies can, wrap things up smoothly and it's all done fairly, that builds trust and that brings in investment.
Right. It creates a more stable, predictable business environment,
Exactly.
which is good for the economy overall.
Exactly. Imagine a world where investors, whether they're here in India or, on the other side of the world, they feel good about investing in Indian companies because they know if something happens, there's a clear, fair system that's going to take care of things.
Right.
That's what we're aiming for here.
It's almost like India's like rolling out the red carpet
Right.
for investors.
Yeah.
So come on in. The water's fine.
Exactly.
And if you ever need to like dip your toes out, we've got a system for that.
Exactly. And that's what they want to hear. And
Right.
that's the signal they're looking for. Like you said, a transparent, efficient insolvency system, that is huge, especially for foreign investment.
Right.
It tells them that India is serious about having, a fair, a predictable place to do business.
Right. So it sounds like it's really promising, all of this. But I know some of our listeners are probably thinking like, okay, that's great for India's economy, but like, what does this actually mean for me?
Right.
Right? Like, what are the actionable takeaways here?
That's the million-dollar question, right? I think the first thing is, knowledge is power. Like whether you're, a big-time investor or a business owner, even if you just like to keep up with what's happening in the Indian economy, understanding these forms, what it all means, that's important.
Yeah, don't check out just because you don't own a multinational corporation. This stuff matters.
This stuff matters. And the good news is the IBBI has made it really easy to find out more.
Okay.
All the forms, they've got detailed notes on how to understand them.
Right.
It's all on their website.
Bookmark that IBBI website, everyone. But let's say you're already in the thick of it. Maybe you're a creditor and there's an insolvency case going on. What questions should you be asking your legal team, your financial advisor, whoever?
That's a great question. And I would say, first off, don't be shy. Like, talk to them. Ask them specifically how these forms affect your case, right? They should be able to, like, walk you through it, explain what your rights are, make sure you're not caught off guard by, like, new deadlines or procedures.
Right, so they're like your Sherpa, basically, through this whole new world.
Exactly. They're your guide. And honestly, it's also a really good idea to, like, stay informed. You know, if the IBBI issues, like updates, clarifications, anything like that about these forms.
Right.
Because this stuff's always evolving, right?
Of course.
So staying current is important.
It's like learning a new language.
Yeah.
You don't want to just learn the basics and then, like, peace out. You got to keep, like, practicing, expanding your vocabulary.
I like that.
Right.
Keep learning. That's how it is in business. That's how it is in finance.
100%. Well, on that note, I think we have covered a ton of ground today.
We really have.
We went deep into the maze of India's new insolvency forms.
A real deep dive.
Explored what they mean in the real world, and hopefully we came out the other side understanding this evolving landscape a little bit better.
I think so, yeah.
But before we go, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought, right? We've talked about transparency, efficiency, making it a better place to do business. But what if these new forms, what if they're even bigger than we think? Could this be what pushes India to become a global leader in ease of doing business? Something to think about. And remember, the journey for knowledge, it doesn't end when we hit stop on the record button.
It never does.
So keep exploring, keep asking questions, and as always, stay ahead of the curve.